so we're ready to get started. Welcome, everyone. We wanted this to be sort of casual and somewhat conversational. The point of this webinar was to really highlight some of the things that we've done over the past year, to talk about things that we're going to be doing this upcoming year, some things that are actually already even in the current version of DataGraph. David, I don't know if you intentionally turned your video off right now or not.
I did.
Okay, just checking. Just want to make sure it's still working. So we're going to talk about things that are already in the beta, some things we've already been working on because DataGraph is constantly evolving. And then David's going to do a demo of ImageTank that he's been working on. And I think that's going to be a pretty cool demo. So one of the points I think of this too that we wanted to get across is how much we really do appreciate feedback from our users and how things evolve to become part of the program. It's hard to respond to everyone's needs automatically when they request them, but there's a lot of really most of what happens in DataGraph is very much a response to what people ask for and trying to really improve the program and make it better. So this past year, there are a number of things that have been added. Just quickly, a couple of the things that were big this year were, one of the first ones was dark mode. I know a lot of people asked about, when are we going to have dark mode? We've got that in there. That was in the beginning of 2020. And there's a lot of other things that were added this year. We never anticipated a lot of things that happened in 2020, and certainly using Zoom was one of the things we had thought about doing webinars, but hadn't really dove in until the pandemic occurred and so many of us were working at home. So we also have a presentation mode within DataGraph that you can use to present your images in DataGraph using Zoom. I don't know that I'm going to really demo that here. I have some other things I want to talk about. But if you go into our knowledge base, it's easy enough to find the presentation mode, and there's some step-by-step instructions for using that. I think that's a really cool addition. Connecting to our scripts, that's another thing that we had been working on for a while, and we got that out into the release version. So what I wanted to do was to really talk about some of my favorite things that have been added into the program this year. And so I'll go ahead and start now by just sharing my screen. And I have 5 things in particular that I wanted to highlight and do a demo of. So so now this is the problem maybe with us both being hosts. Now I'm not able to share my screen, but I think, David, that you can change the settings to allow others to share.
I think I did that.
Okay, great. Okay, so now people should be able to see my desktop. I'm just going to share the whole thing here. Of course, I have to move things around a little bit. And let's see. Okay, so, and I think this, for some reason, I'm getting this recording alert, but I think that's an old pop-up because as far as I know, everyone can hear me right now. Is that right, David? You can hear me, correct? Oh, I can't hear you now.
I can hear it, but are you recording this is the question.
Yes, it is recording. Hopefully it's recording correctly. Okay, and I see on the chat, yeah, people are saying, yes, you can hear me. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and get into this a little bit. This is actually something for the end. I didn't mean to pop that. We'll talk about that in a minute. We're going to talk about the scalar field. What I wanted to do was show you some of the new things based on what's in the online example window. And the first one that I wanted to talk about, so this is going to just be my top 5 things that have been added this year. And one of the things that I think was really useful is adding in a color scheme option for the box command. Now, if you haven't used the box command, if you go into the example file window, type in box, for example, there's an example that we uploaded this year. This is a new file that was added based on a request from a user. And in this file, you can see that we have a graphic over here that shows you a mean and confidence interval around these points. And there's different categories. So this is actually a data set. This is a standard data set that's in R, for example, on tooth growth of, I believe it's tooth growth for guinea pigs. So this file is already here. Now, this doesn't use the functionality I want to show you, but I thought this would be a good one to illustrate it. If I add a new graph, and you can see the data set here has a column for dose, has a categorical column for the type of supplement that was used, and then there's the length, the tooth length. And here on the x-axis, things are categorized according to the dose. So I can use a box command very quickly or I can create box plots very quickly from this. I can highlight the column, the dose column, highlight down the length column, and if I just click box command, I very quickly get the box and whisker representation. And also,
Pamela,
this is also, yeah.
You might need to move your window into the main window because we just see the example files window.
Oh, you can't see it.
No, I think it's on a different screen.
Okay, thank you so much for pointing that out. That is definitely not. So let me start and reshare. Move everything back over again. Sorry, I'm trying to use my new monitor, but it's not cooperating. There we go. Do this again. Move
It's a matter of what is the primary monitor. I think it opens up on the primary, and that's the one that you're using Zoom on.
Yeah, I've had this problem recently with Zoom where for some reason it sort of gets stuck a little bit. So, but can you see my file now?
Nope.
Oh, you can't.
It has started screen sharing. Double click to enter full screen mode.
Oh, well, on my screen, it says I am sharing. We might switch to David sharing his screen in a moment if this is not going to work for me. Here we go again. So according to what I'm looking at, I am sharing my screen.
I don't see it, but
I have found sometimes it can take a while for it to pop up.
all black for others. Yep.
Really? Darn it. So strange. All right, you know what, David, maybe we should just go ahead and I might need to
Yeah.
oh, maybe I need to move Zoom to the active desktop. Yeah, maybe. Okay, I'll try one more time. I'm stopping.
Something, but you just shared a single window, I think.
Yep, so now I'm on. It maybe seems like Zoom is, I might have to change a setting to make sure that it knows that I have two windows here.
Yeah, it's flickered.
Okay, so I'm going to try one more time. Share the same desktop.
Seemed to work, yes, and you're in full screen mode.
Okay, great. So that was a good, hopefully I can move this over and not be a problem. Can you still see it? See the window?
I see you now.
Okay. Always have these little things that happen here. So what I was trying to show you is the fact that I can take this data. Let me do it again quickly. So I'll add a new graph. This is a data set that has 3 columns. And if I want to group the data according to the dose that was given to these subjects, I can highlight these 2 columns, click the box command, and I very quickly get this box and whisker graph. The box command itself does a lot other than just the box and whisker. In case you're not aware of this, if you go to the type menu, there's all these other things that this command can do related to distributions of data. In fact, we were just talking about maybe this shouldn't even be called the box command anymore because it does so many different things. But what I like to do is make a copy of this. So I can click, option drag, make a copy of the command, and then change the type to points, for example, and then you'll see the points overlain on the actual box and whisker. Very easy to do to get these kind of dot plots. And I know this is something that have had a number of users talk about how this is becoming such a more common type of visualization. But the thing that I wanted to point out to you is the fact that we can now change the marker type to have a color based on some categorical data. And specifically here, if you expand this command and I change the point color from uniform, and I'm going to select the column that I want the color to change based on. So here, for example, I can check this supplement column, and then you notice there's a scheme option that pops up. I'll say create color scheme, and then that creates a data-driven color associated with those points that I can then go into here and I can change these colors to something more pleasing. So anyway, so that's the color scheme option. That's this in the points. I think this is a very useful option that I've used for a number of different things to be able to see the points within this data and to kind of dig into data a little bit more. The other improvement or addition to DataGraph that I think is really cool is the ability to add a transparency to the points to the color scheme itself. Here I'm using the color scheme to color these points. You can use data-driven color schemes in a lot of different commands, but you'll notice that at the bottom of this color scheme variable, there's a transparency option that I can now use to change all of these and add a transparency. That I have found to be really useful. In the past, you would have to change each color individually, go into the color picker and change the opacity. You can still do that. So you can have certain points that are more transparent than others. But this is a very handy thing that was added this year. So those are my top two: the color scheme for the box command, the transparency for color schemes. My number three, counting down to my top one, is using the ternary functions. And if we go back into the online example window, let me move this over. So David, just to confirm, can you see the online example window now?
Yes.
Great. So I'm going to go into this and search in ternary. And when you do, you'll see there's a number of different templates that pop up. Actually, this one might be, oh no, that looks like a new one too. I think I did update all of these to use the new functions, but let me open this, because ternary diagrams are something that we've had a template for it for a while, but it was really using a lot of geometry to calculate the ternary diagram in a way that that was maybe not as transparent as to how do I really create this for myself. So this is a file that's available to you where the grid has been computed. So there's sections of this file. For example, if I go and look at this data, you can see there's these grid calculations. So we've done all this. You don't have to recreate these grids. If I wanted to start a file from scratch, you can click on a thumbnail, click this clone button, and then I could make my own diagram from this that I can add information to. And the way that this works is that these ternary functions allow you to map any A, B, C combination of composition of three materials and put that into this function in order to output the X and Y coordinate for the ternary diagram. So it's really not that hard. If you go into the sample data, for example, here, we have a data set where we have clay, silt, and sand. And then there's two expression columns that have been added. And I'll open up one of these here. So you can see ternary X, and I just import the names of the columns, sand, silt, and clay. And then that's showing up on my ternary diagram. And this file, I won't go into too much detail, but it has a lot of different ways that we're showing this ternary diagram. So for example, the triangle here has a fill and the different colors. And what we have is a soil composition diagram that shows you the various regions for this data, and even has a colored version of that. So one of the things that this takes advantage of is the fact that when you draw a line within DataGraph, if you close that line, that becomes essentially, I don't know if you call this an object, David, but DataGraph recognizes that it's a closed shape, and then you can add a fill into that shape. And that's how we made this soil textures diagram that you see here. So I thought this was really cool. And again, this file was very much based on working with one of our users who had the need for a file like this. And he was very helpful actually in helping to provide some of the information to help to delineate the various soil textures. So anyway, so I've been having fun with the soil ternary diagram, but also doing some phase diagrams recently that I'm going to add to the example files probably within the next couple of days. I've been working on that. Okay, so two more that I want to go over, and one of them is the ability to use a slider, let me see, to use variables within the sliders. So let me demonstrate what this is about in case you're not familiar with this. Go ahead and close the ternary diagram. I don't need this because I can open this back up again. And the file I want to use to demonstrate this is this file where we animated a tangent line for a function. I thought that this was a pretty cool addition. If you open up this file and you're not familiar with doing animations, it shows you right here a screenshot of where you need to what you need to click within the file in order to play the animation. So I'll click my play button, and then you can see how this is being animated. This was kind of a cute example to do in terms of someone was asking how to determine a tangent line. So we not only determined it, but David and I always like to animate things when we can. So we went ahead and added an animation feature to this. But what you'll notice is that within the section where we define a variable that's being changed in order to create the animation, there's this range variable that has a range setting where we set the min and the max of the data that we're animating this over. And rather than having to type in the numbers, I'm actually pulling this basically from the data columns. I've created these two variables for min and max that are determining the min and the max from the column itself. So this is what we call you'd call this a number from column variable. These are actually very easy to create. If you have a numeric column and you right click on the top of it, there's an option for number from column, and I can say I want to pull the maximum, for example, and I just changed the name here to simply be max. And there you have it. There you have the max value. So again, makes it so much easier for making these files. And it's something that actually helps you with the templates because now you could paste in your own data. These are X and Y values that I calculated from a function and then converted them to a numeric value. But if you change this data by pasting in other columns, then it will dynamically pull the min and the max for those columns, and then the animation should work appropriately for those as well. So you'll notice this a lot more in our templates that they use that. And there's one more, and then I'm gonna quit and we'll move on to talking about new things. But one more thing that, again, these are some of my favorites. This is the ability to drag and drop a thumbnail. So let me show you the file that I wanted to demonstrate with this just quickly. So this is very useful for compositing graphs, and we have a number of examples here where you see composite graphs. So I'll open this up. This is one of these functionalities that came out of adding more functionality actually to the thumbnails themselves. So now there's an ability to create a graph group. I've used this a little bit, but not as much as maybe this other functionality. So the one that I really have found very useful, in particular, that I use now all the time, is this ability to composite graphs easier. The way to do this, or one way, is to create a new graph. So go under the File menu, New Graph for Composition. This creates a blank canvas where the margins are set to 0. It's really no different than any other canvas, but it's just set up easier so you don't have the X and Y lines there, so you can composite graphs that you've created otherwise. So, so when you do the new graph for composition, you'll see this graphic command is added, where in the past you'd have to go and select what image you want to put there. But now what you can do is go to a thumbnail and drag it and drop it right on that command, and you'll see now that that image is added. So this was something that David came up with that I just love it. I use this all the time. I find it so useful. You can then change where this is aligned to, and then these other images, you don't have to already have the graphic command there. I can take any thumbnail and drag it and drop it, and now that image is here. Take another thumbnail, drag it. Yeah, I could overwrite an existing one, or just drag it and add it as a new image that is also here. So anyway, so really, really handy for compositing images. And that's when I was looking over the list of the things that we've added in 2020, that came out as my favorite one, because I just feel like it saves a lot of time. And using that drag and drop functionality, I find to be just very satisfying. So the next thing that we wanted to do was to really switch gears a little bit and talk more about the things that we are already working on and have added into the beta, and things that we're thinking about for 2020, for 2021, for this coming year. So first, let me talk about, or let me bring up a file that has a new functionality that we have, which is for a note field. And David, I've done a lot of talking so far, so maybe you want to comment a little bit on this. I'll bring up a file that has it. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what this functionality is.
So wait, I'm looking at the chat. There's the first question. Can you drop it right in the image window? Oh no, the dragging the images, dragging thumbnails, you can only drag it into the command list and not on top of the graphic, right? That's, I guess you sort of, right? I mean,
that's true. So if you have a new one and
you can't position it there. I mean, if you dragged it there, it wouldn't do anything. It would not drag into that location. So that's, yeah, that is a little bit, but then you can drag it interactively on the screen. So then you position it. Now, okay, so you start so this section is kind of more about like, you know what we did, we sort of summarized what we did last year. For those of you that have been with us for a long time, you know that we are constantly pushing things out, and the beta users will see it as they come in and as they're being sort of refined. And then every now and then we'll when it gets to a point which we think many of these features are stable, we'll include the ones that are stable and committed, that we're committed to make that work forever and ever, with a small asterisk, but really intent on keeping that working the same way, and keep others in the beta, and they really are in the release version. They're just hidden. You don't have the UI elements to create them. So what we want to talk about in this section is kind of what we are planning. Well, A, what we're sort of doing in the beta, but B, kind of also think about the fact that we are constantly listening to users. We're constantly thinking about other things to add and going back, like at the end, we're going to talk about ImageTank, and ImageTank is another kind of creative effort. And some of the features that were created first in ImageTank are starting to bleed back into DataGraph. Export animation and show it in Keynote? Yes, it is. You can export an animation by just clicking on the little movie icon above that.
Oops. Yeah, I can do that.
So there's a movie
This
icon
one.
there. You click on it, it creates all the frames for you. You can specify if you want it to be in Retina resolution or in the standard resolution and export it.
Yeah,
right?
you can scrub
And
through it here, even see what it is.
any time, like timing and speed and so forth, that is done by in the normal window. This has really no settings after that. It pre-renders all the frames and then you can export it as an MPEG movie and sort of play that.
Yeah, so this is the one I just made that MP4.
Yep. So the
Now that's not new, but that is cool.
yeah, and the new features. I mean, you're going to talk about what are the sort of the summary of it is the.
Yeah, so the first one that I have here is, this is a file that's online now. This is an autocorrelation plot. Again, this was, someone was asking how would we do this, and we made a file that does it. So not a lot of the example files have this note functionality in it, but this one does.
And they're not visible in the current version, but they will be visible once you update next time, because they're there in the document. The old version just doesn't know to do them.
So if people have the beta, they will see this. Is that correct?
Yeah, beta will see it.
Yeah, so if you're a beta user.
And the people that are still in the release version, they will still be able to see that template file, but that template file will not have any notes. But the way that it's saved, you can easily open up a file from a newer version. Right? You just ignore the things that are new.
So, and one of the things that so the way this works is that there's just a note field over here to the right. You'll see this little icon next to these objects, and you just click on it, and it's a pop-up that shows to the side. Having some kind of an additional note within the program is something people have asked for. We've had for a long time this ability to add a separate note field, but having a note attached to a data column or a group or even a command is something that we didn't want it to be kind of buried. And so I think, David, isn't this something that you sort of started working with this in ImageTank and then had the idea to bring this into DataGraph?
Yeah, and as you will see, this is a UI look coming from DataGraph, ImageTank, in terms of how this window pops up. Yeah.
And so what the other thing that's added, and actually this is not just the note field itself, but all the note fields. You'll notice that there's a URL link here. In the past, you could type in a URL link and then right-click it and convert it to an actual clickable link. But now you may notice, if you're a beta user, that the text blocks will automatically recognize when something is a web link. So I just think this is great, because now I can say, this column of data, I can give the exact source for this, a little description, and even a web link that I can click on, and then go to that exact location on the web where this information came from.
And the interesting thing is that we had questions, sort of suggestions through discussions and discussion board to kind of have notes attached to columns that go with the column. You can sort of see that the notes in the column list, they're sort of entries that are always visible. And if there's a lot of them, they kind of spread out the columns, and they don't go with the columns, they're just entries in it. And we were thinking about ways to do it. And we were sort of do we have them as part of the disclosure triangle? Do we have something that shows you have a node, and when you click it, then it is sort of inside the command? And that, in retrospect, is sort of obvious because it keys into what Word and others have in terms of notes to text blocks. But it's sort of, and why didn't I come up with this immediately? Is that one of those things that it sort of has to mature enough a little bit to kind of figure out how to do it and how to interact with the selection. For example, if you select from the side, if you you can drag and select multiple columns. If you're selecting columns by clicking on the margin on the right, and dragging, you can see that it doesn't select it just by dragging over the node. You have to select, actually drag over the, like that, and you can sort of see that that's.
Sorry, I'm not sure what, are you?
It doesn't matter. It's sort of a nitpicky detail. I tend to do that. So let me just sort of, it really, the node is part of the column, but it doesn't look visually. I mean, if you click on the node, it doesn't select the column, right?
Right,
Select
yeah.
the node. And
Yeah.
then also the tooltip will work. If you just hover over it, it will show it without bringing it up.
Like this, yeah, I'm just hovering
You
and
don't
it
have
will.
to always, this is the edit mode when you click on it.
Yeah.
So
And then you
about,
can
like,
get the link, yeah.
there was a question here about like what programming language I was using. This is the language to code DataGraph and ImageTank and DataTank are kind of, it's a hierarchy of it. It's like the Objective-C, because this is old. It started as an old user base, and I've been coding in this language like from '97, since it came out as Rhapsody at the beginning. So it's Objective-C is the UI. It uses Objective-C++ to call the C++ routines, and all the numerics is C++. And the C++ are essentially then a memory hierarchy onto a C type attitude in terms of coding. So yeah, there's a whole stack of like Objective-C going to C++ optimized based on kind of C and Fortran inspirations. So and that's all. I mean, there's nothing, there's very little extra, there's no other languages, there's very few, there's no numerical like libraries that I depend on. I depend on like an Excel library and some encryption library, but that's about it. So okay, so where were we in terms of?
Okay, so I think we really like this note field, so we've talked about it for a bit. Let's move on.
So the moving on is what I wanted to say, because it came up a point in the chat window about the labels. There was an issue about the points command. When you have multiple labels on a point, there's very little options you can have. You have the point column, you have the formatting for it, and then offset to it. And it fits in one line, and it's compact, and it doesn't if you're not using it, it doesn't take up a lot of kind of mental space. And the question obviously is that when if you, for example, put label on every single point of that, in this plot, you put a label on every single one, this can be messy. And the reasons around that are, well, one is you can decide to only show the points when you do the loop tool, and that will help with it. So you don't see them normally, but if you use the loop tool to magnify them, you can see them. But really, as people pointed out, normally when you have things that are slightly overlapping, the labels could be a little bit smarter. And that is not in the points command, and doesn't quite fit in the points command, because I'm very careful about the points command not being overwhelmingly large. So, but that type of a feedback is very useful, because we are constantly thinking about what other commands and methods fit into the structure. And one of the things that we are planning, and is in the early stages, is not in the beta, but it sort of speaks to it, is like a more dedicated labels command that is smarter about labels, and that can have all kinds of features to it. So if you're in the beta and you start seeing that happen, by all means participate in that sort of discussion. We are very kind of strict on, we don't want to add something that we don't like, is not consistent, but we want to see what type of functionality you want to do and how we can do them in our method, right?
Yeah, and that's actually one, I hadn't had that, on the short list of things to talk about today, but that's a good one. We have been kind of conceiving of this label command for a little bit, in terms of, then it would allow you to do also other things in a more data-driven way, like the way the points can be so data-driven, to have, the size and the style and all of that can be based on data. Having labels where you can have a lot more, the font or the size, or have it very much be data-driven. Anyway, there are other couple of questions on on the chat as well, but one of them was the next thing that we were going to talk a little bit about, which is
and
the
we're getting
scalar
the
field.
request often, like, and before, above that, is there an iPad companion plan? And there's sort of, we're going to go through these things, but it's like iPad companion. That is a fascinating thing. I have done a number of actions in the back, like in the code, to make it work on iOS. There's very few things that you have to do kind of coding wise in terms of like what objects are in for Mac applications versus iOS applications. And I've done that already with an eye towards at least having a viewer. So when people want like an iPad companion, it's an interesting question of how much should be in it. Is it a basic viewer? Is it a basic modifying things? It is a like data exploration tool. What do people want to do? And that's something that we want feedback on that. The statistical functions in DataGraph, like data density plot, I would say send me a mail about it. I want to know. I don't know exactly what type of graph you want about that. So send mail to help. I also read help, and Pamela can point me to that issue. And the main thing with a new feature like that, I kind of want to know what type of, is there a reference to it? Is there some example documents to it? What do you really want to see about that? And it sort of starts the thinking process on it.
So let me just talk a little bit about what I have on the screen right now.
This is the scalar field, yes.
Yeah, this is a scalar field command. The question is, is this an example file? This is not in the online examples, but it is online. If you go into the knowledge base, so you can get there from the help menu, and go into, there's a section now here that we added where we've kind of been reorganizing this a little bit for versions. There's a beta section, and in there you can see the scalar field command, and there's a bunch of what I think are pretty cool examples here. And all of these are you can download these examples from this web page. They're not in the online examples since it is just a beta functionality, but these are all various grids that you can create. So we just tried to do a lot of different kinds. Here's the volcano example. Again, you can download this file here. Logarithmic data, microarray data, and then this last example that we just called Trippy, it shows you that you can not only make the scalar field, but you can map the scalar field to the same scalar field to different shapes. And this was just a really kind of cool example that we came up with one day and put this up here. So the scalar field command is absolutely on the short list of things to add in. It's been in the beta actually for a bit now. And we know users, we know that people are using it. We haven't heard a lot of complaints about it not using. Initially, I think we had some feedback on things to tweak here and there. It doesn't do, like a lot of things in DataGraph, it's not, what is the word I'm looking for? I mean, it does a really good job at a basic scalar field and basic contouring where you tell it within the command. So here's the actual, let me switch my view here to show you the command a little bit. So this is what the scalar field command looks like for this data, where I'm defining the color, and I have contours defined where I'm selecting the contours from one of the columns that's in my data table. And and this is just one single column of data. Actually, the original data set has all this data included. It came from a data that's a big array, and I flattened this into one column. The scalar field takes data that's in this flattened format, which if you have not done that before, it's really incredibly easy to do within DataGraph. So here I have this big array. My command needs a single column. Actually, I guess maybe this can use arrays too. But anyway, so you could just go to here and say data, flatten columns, and now it would be in the format that I need for the scalar field command. So that, use it in the beta now, try it and let us know if you have any comments or feedback.
So
And
one point about that is that this scalar field is sort of, it has existed in my tool chains, like in DataTank and ImageTank, for a long time. So it's not, I mean, that it was just more a question of what to bring over here. And the main thing that is now kind of different than a normal scalar field is that it can be categorical in both of them. I mean, one or both of the dimensions. So that, like someone pointing to the image, like the bioinformatics thing. And especially when you have a bioinformatics type thing where there's a few categories and then a large number of values in one dimension, it does is fairly sort of sensitive at not skipping over data. So imagine the following thing. You have like 10 categories on the y-axis, and then you have 500,000 entries on the x-axis, clearly way more than any pixels you have. So rather than striding through and showing you every 10th or 20th number, it actually uses the entire information to create the graphic and zooms in that dynamically. So, and even the magnifying glass does that dynamically. So you could see maybe a blurred image at the top scale because there's so many information that it blends that information. But as you go through the loop tool, it magnifies that, zooms in on it. +1 for importing a few million lines. Million lines is easy.
Yeah, yeah, and actually, I guess there are a couple of other questions here, but yeah, a million lines is not a problem. I think there's no limit at this. I've gone up to 10 million or 100 million and haven't had any problem.
There's a technical limit that is 2.7 billion, and it's going to be sluggish to my taste at the few 100 million rows, and like a few million is not a problem if you do it right.
Yeah, you should just be able to drag in. If you have a CSV with a few million, you should just be able to drag it and drop it in, no problem.
And if you're importing a file with a few million rows, million lines, really the recommended thing is to use the special importer, because that is, I mean, the default importer that you drag a file in or import a file and select a text file, that is, the good thing is that it auto detects the structure. The bad thing is that it's not quite as efficient as it could be. You don't see that out of a few 100,000 lines, you won't notice a difference. But at a much larger thing, the better one is to use the special importer. And the special importer is a lot faster at it. And it can also do multiple files at the same time, and it threads to combine them. So that the special importer, especially if you have multiple files, that can sort of import at the limit of how fast you can read the file.
So that's under data import special.
Yes.
There's a chapter in the PDF manual that goes into the detail of the import special. If I open this up, it's going to ask me to select a file. Maybe we don't really have time for this right now.
We don't have time for that, but there's a lot of things in it, and one of the really cool things is that you can import a gzipped file. So you can take your data file, and that is large. You can compress it using the gz compression routine, and it can import the file directly without you having to decompress it. The command line processor. Okay, the last one, please send that to help. We are very responsive to it. That's exactly the type of thing that we want to see. Those are questions that we want to see in the helpline. And I want to move over to are we ready for the ImageTank demo?
Let me just comment one quick thing. We're working on, if you are a former DataGraph user or know people who have been using DataGraph, a lot of the programs out there, Kaleidograph's another one, do not work on 64-bit, are not optimized for the the new silicon chip, whereas DataGraph is. And so we will have an importer for DataGraph files, I think, coming out pretty soon in the beta. And so we've seen your other questions. I guess we really want to make sure, I want to make sure David has enough time for ImageTank. So I will stop sharing and go ahead, David, and let you.
Okay, so let me see if I can share my screen and just share the desktop. Okay, so that's, I don't know if this was visible. Okay, so let me just hide this data tank, the image tank here, and let me do the data tank. So here a quick version of history, right? Which is DataTank was my first kind of commercial application, and that was sort of got some press because of Apple back in 2005, but the thing is, DataTank is kind of a big application, and DataGraph was carved out of DataTank as the XY plotting things out of DataTank. And then, of course, DataGraph had a life of its own, so it moved away from the parent to some extent. Now, DataTank has sort of been languishing a little bit, and it's easy. I mean, it's sort of, once you think like me, it's easy, but it takes a little bit of time to kind of get into it. So the ImageTank is essentially a rewrite or rethinking of DataTank. And it focuses on image processing. Initially, it focused on image processing, and is not limited to that. It can definitely do a lot more of, like, it's starting to get now thoughts and ideas from DataGraph, sort of basically by, in some sense, DataGraph is giving back to DataTank to some extent. And this here is a complicated use of ImageTank, and kind of just wanted to sort of show you that as a way of kind of highlighting kind of where you can take it, not that you have to take it that way or everyone needs to be at this level to enter. So this is from a paper from Journal of Computational Biology back a year and a half ago, and the issue was that there's a new imaging methodology called light sheet microscopy, which is a 3D scanning microscopy, and it is scanned at these slices going through, and you kind of create, the benefit of it is there's a huge, it's one of these high throughput microscopy. The problem with it is that the tools out there really can't handle it. DataTank could handle it, but it was sort of a little unwieldy for biologists. So ImageTank is a way to kind of make it still do the same thing as DataTank, make it easier to do than DataTank was, and make it easier feasible for a biologist or sort of to use it, right? And so here is kind of the way that it works. And let me sort of very quickly, it sort of has some similarities to DataGraph, but the main thing is that on this side here is there's not a single table. This is the object list. So this is the tank, so to speak. This is where the objects live. And there's a hierarchy, which you can sort of see the same thing from DataGraph. And instead of being columns, these are much larger objects. And this is, for example, a data file. And this is a small one. It's only like 17 gigabytes of like imaging data. But this is a time series of that. So it has 120 time values of a 3D image set. And if you look at the 3D image set, that is a 600 by 200 by 200 grid here. And you can easily scan through as multiple channels. You can have multiple slices. You can easily kind of go through this very interactively. So ImageTank is very kind of graphically immersive. And you can see that by, for example, you can click on that. You can see more details of it. There's the loop tool for it. You can inspectors on it. It's very much kind of live with the data. And this also has a concept similar to the animation variable that you can scrub through the data set. So you can sort of see here that this is the image after a lot of processing. Right? This data comes in not in an immediately mode. This is immediate displayable mode. You have to kind of adapt it. You have to transform it, sort of adjust the channels. There's a lot of kind of image processing methods that you do, and you compute things on the surface of it. So I kind of wanted to sort of show this is the data. It's a 3D surface representation of it. You can also hit play here to animate through in time. So this is the benefit of the light sheet microscopy. It is, you can image a live cell. You don't have to freeze it and slice it, cut open. You can monitor it as it is moving. So this is a little kind of cell that is doing its thing, exploring its neighborhood, and kind of looking as alien as it does, right? So
David, someone has asked, how does ImageTank compare to ImageJ?
The goal is to kind of replace like sort of be a modern version of ImageJ. So ImageJ is primarily a 2D drawing routine, like imaging process. So 2D ImageJ is the standard. It's like J stands for Java. It's been around since the 80s. It was written completely in Java. It focuses on, so it has a few things. One, the main limitation is that it's 2D for the most part. There's some additions that allow you to have stacks of 3D, but it doesn't natively kind of do a lot of 3D imaging in it. It is the big problem with ImageJ is that it's destructive editing, which means that you have your image and then you act on it as if you are in Photoshop. So that means that you take your image and you sharpen it, and then is this replaced with the sharpened version. You slice it, or you do whatever color calibration is, then it's replaced with this. And unless you save a snapshot of every step, you can't go backwards. DataGraph, the ImageTank, is a pipeline approach, similar to the DataGraph in the sense that you go through, for the most part, we try to move you into taking the data and acting on it so you can sort of see the steps that you go through. In DataGraph,
David, someone has just asked about, what a quick rundown of the processing steps here.
Yeah, the quick process of that is, if you look at this guy here, so this is a data file coming in, and you can sort of go through the clients of that, and you can see that image reads in that raw image stack. And then you have you do a flat field correction because these images, like the images are not completely aligned, so you need to kind of register them along. You can have a smooth image from that, and you sort of
and again, I think I'll emphasize, I know you already said it, but just so people really kind of take this in, that rather than an image processing approach where you do a step, you create that output, and then you have to take that step and do another set of computation, and then that has other output. This is all live. You're not,
you can
nothing's
change any of
destructive.
these things, right? So like this one here, the flat field images, this is kind of another image coming in. So this is an image coming in here. This is like stacked up. It was an issue about HDF5. This is a different file format that is very efficient at reading things. So this one here reads that in from my format, but here's just a couple of TIFF files that are being read in. You can compute this. So this, for example, is an image computation. So you take your images, you composite them, you take ratios of them because you're analyzing some intensity scales. This one here, you can change this calculation and everything else gets updated after that. And it doesn't change the initial one. Yep.
Why don't, someone was asking for maybe a bit of a simpler image. I don't know if you have a 2D image, but I know you did have at least some function calculations.
So let me just do another, here's the DataGraph. I do a lot of code development in ImageTank that then goes into DataGraph. So that's DataGraph is my reverse engineering the file format. Here is one. This is a simpler one. So here's the image is not read from a file, is created analytically. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that definitely that's a little bit.
So this is much simpler, right?
Yeah.
The other one is like aspirational, where in the fact that there's a lot of functionality already in it, you are not likely to hit if you hit a boundary, you should talk to me and we'll figure out if I can move that out. But here is a more reasonable first step. This is still usable. This is, instead of like 50 different modules, it has like 2. And this one here is an image, not read from a file, but created. There's 2 channels to this. There's a first channel, there's a second channel. This is images could be photographs. Like you can open up a single image. It's always a risky thing to open up a random image from my disk, so I'm not going to do that. But here's an image with 2 channels that are just done analytically. You can see here, there's a C parameter being used in here. You can vary the C parameter using the standard sort of floating like slider here. You can see how the graphic is being updated. Here is in some sense your X like 3D plot. There's a scalar field, 3D version of it, 2D version of it, that you can sort of draw. So that's a scalar field. Here's contouring on the scalar field. And this is
one of the things that I think is really cool with ImageTank, that again, it's a different approach than the way DataGraph is. You know, this really allows you this exploration, and the fact that you can split the windows.
Let me just kind of to sort of show the speed of it. I will start animating this parameter so you can sort of see how things are changing in time. So I can resize the graphic. So this is the objects here. This is the graphic representation here. You can resize, everything is kind of done. So the way that ImageTank does it, everything is done concurrently, asynchronously. So it uses all the cores in your computer and does everything in the background. Every little dot you see blinking is an indication of a thread, essentially a core on your machine running that task. So you can have multiple things going on concurrently, and there's a lot of them. The thumbnails are each one done concurrently also. So you can sort of see where those are. You can split this paneling much easier than the compositing, and take this guy here, which is, you can sort of see that this one here is drawn, this one here is drawn, this one here exists, but is not being drawn anywhere. So I can just sort of select where to draw it. And I can rotate this interactively, I can zoom in interactively on it. I can add in things like, here is the commands that go behind that. And you can see here, you can like hide and show it. You can add another plane in here. This is the slicing plane that you go on here. There's transparency going on in that one. You can see here as you're dragging this, you can sort of see how the horizontal and vertical thing is going. You know, this doesn't interrupt your calculation. Everything else is going as you're rotating the 3D. You can easily.
So, David, there's a few questions on the chat that let's try and maybe we can get to a couple of them.
There is a plot command.
Right? Oh, that's an important point, right? That anyone who has a DataGraph license can also do plotting within ImageTank. Correct.
No,
I mean, ImageTank is a public beta that anyone with DataGraph can, that actually I guess anyone can sign up to try ImageTank now, but you do have to have a DataGraph license to use the plotting capability.
Oh, so this one here is first of the channels here. So the histogram, this is the plot of that. This is the intensity plot.
So David, can you, someone was asking about exporting and importing to ImageJ. I don't think that that's anything we've really.
The exporting to ImageJ?
Importing/exporting to ImageJ.
So ImageJ typically can easily export TIFF files, and you can drag in TIFF files into the list here and it will import them. Mm-hmm. You can drag in any images into the list. Dragging a single image is the following. You go, if it's 2D, you can click on image and you can have here sort of starting points. And one of them is like a single file with a sequence of images. This would be if you stack multiple images as sort of into a single TIFF file, it can look at those as a time sequence. You can have a folder of them. So if you have a lot of different files, they all have the ending .tiff, you can point it to the folder, put a saying like, take every TIFF file in, and it imports the entire stack.
So I think we'll since we're at noon, we're at our sort of our time limit. We can stay a little bit and try and answer a couple more questions. But thanks everyone for attending. I know some people have to leave